price-demand equation is an equation that relates the price with the demand that you would have on your commodity. So a price-demand equation, when you solve it for P, will give you the equation where the price of a commodity is a function of X, the demand. So X is the demand and P is your price. The revenue function can be written as the product of the number X that you sold times that price demand. So now let's look at number 3. It says the marketing department has determined that the price in dollars of the demand X for a brand of speakers are related to the equation X equals 20,000 minus 25P. Part A, express the price P in terms of the domain X and find the domain of this function. So express the price P in terms of the domain X really just means take this guy and solve it for P. So let's take that and solve it for P. So I have X is equal to 20,000 minus 25P. So if I move 25P over here to the left and X to the right, I get 25P is equal to 20,000 minus X. And if I divide everything by 25 to solve for P, I get that P is equal to, well, 20,000 divided by 25 is 800 minus 1/25 X. So 800 minus 1/25 X. So the price expressed as an equation where the variable or the input value is that demand would be 800 minus 1/25 X. Then it says find the domain of this function. What's the domain of this function? And the domain of this function is as follows. Remember, X represents the demand. So if you want to find the domain of this thing, and X represents the demand, the smallest amount of demand that you can have is nobody wants your product. And if nobody wants your product, then the least amount that you can have is 0. So 0 is the smallest demand that you could possibly have. Now we need to figure out what's the most demand that we could possibly have for this product. So the smallest demand would be 0. Nobody wants it. Now we need to figure out how much would we possibly get as demand. Well, we go back to the original given equation to figure that out. Because remember, P represents price. So if we set P equal to 0, this term goes away. So basically, if I make my price $0, which means this thing is free, the most I'm ever going to get rid of is 20,000. So if I, again, set my price equal to 0, which means that this guy goes away, then the most I'm going to get demanded, because X represents my demand, is 20,000. So the domain of my function here is going to be that X is going to be between 0 and 20,000. So that's part A. Part B is find the revenue function from the sale of X number of speakers and find the domain of the revenue function. Well, the revenue function is R of X is equal to X times P. So R of X in this case is going to be X times, well, P was this 800 minus 1/25 X. If I distribute my X to both of these terms, I get 800X minus 1/25 X squared. So my revenue function is going to be 800X minus 1/25 X squared. Then it wants us to find the domain of this function. Well, the domain of this function, the domain of my revenue function is going to be the same as the domain of my price P in terms of its domain. It's still going to be that X is trapped between 0 and 20,000. So those two will always be the same. Part C says find the marginal revenue at a production level of 5,000 speakers and interpret your results. Okay, so part C now. Find the marginal revenue. Marginal says derivative. So I need to find the derivative of this function. So R prime of X is going to equal, well, the derivative of 800X is just 800. Because remember, if it's X to the first power, this is going to become X to the 0. It's going to go away, right? That's always going to be X. The derivative of a number times X is always going to be just the number or the coefficient. So negative 1/25 X squared, if I take that derivative, again, I know I multiply that 2 there. So I have 2/25 X to the 1 less, which is just 1. So if I need to find the marginal revenue at a level of 5,000 speakers, that just means to plug in 5,000 in place of your X in your marginal revenue function. So in this case, what we're doing is we're looking at 800 minus 2 over 25 times 5,000. And we end up with 400. So it says interpret our results. So what does that mean? It means that at a production level of 5,000 speakers, the revenue is increasing at a rate of $400. So at a production of 5,000 speakers, our revenue is increasing at a rate of $400.